I'll be reading Luke 13:31 through 35. Luke 13:31 through 35. Give you a second to turn. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go and tell that fox, 'Behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I finish my course. Nevertheless, I must go on my way today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that the prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered you children together, as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Behold, your house is forsaken, and I tell you, for you will not see me until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord."
Luke chapter 12 is where we'll be starting tonight. Thank you guys for coming back out here. It's a pleasure to have the slot for one of the evening sermons. I love these opportunities. I obviously, as a profession, I teach in a classroom every day, and I talk about early American history, and that's something that I love. It's a topic that I'm deeply passionate about, but even more so to create a lesson, to share it with people who I care and love about, with the topic being the Word of God. So thank you guys for your attention tonight. We're going to be primarily in Luke chapter 12 and Luke chapter 13, because as we have hopefully found out in our daily Bible reading going through the Gospel of Luke, Luke writes in a very systematic way. Luke, just like Mark, will create kind of these theological sandwiches where he puts together stories of like-minded topics. Mark is amazing at this, and Luke does it as well. So whenever we're reading through the Gospel of Luke and we see repetitive stories and we think, I think he's trying to tell me a theme here. Well, he is. There's an intention behind that. We can't think of the Gospels as being some chronological history book of the life of Jesus. Yes, it's historically accurate. Yes, we can read it as the true events of his life. But the Gospel authors, they take these stories, these teaching, these parables, and they intentionally group them together. So tonight, we're going to be looking at one of those sections in Luke. Luke chapter 12 through Luke chapter 13, I'm going to argue tonight is one chunk or one section of text, all having to do with judgment. So I kind of joked around with some people before I got started tonight. And I said, "Are you ready for the heat?" And they're like, "Uh-oh, is it fire and brimstone tonight?" Well, no, not really. But it is a serious topic. It's a topic of judgment. So before we dive into this actual text in Luke, let's just do a really quick crash course on parables, right? This is a specific style of teaching that we should be familiar with, and it's a style that was preferred by Jesus all the time. Often it's said that a parable is some type of an earthly story using day-to-day terminology, events, people, things in the environment to tell a message that is of a higher spiritual purpose. You can see why this is attractive for Jesus, because when he goes out and he's talking with the crowd, and he needs to convince a bunch of fishermen about some theological principle, he's going to use metaphors and similes and parables to get his point across spiritually. And Luke is an expert at these. He's going to take these parables, mash them together with common themes in order to make a greater point. Now, specific to these parables of judgment, when Jesus is speaking, he's going to have specific conversations with his disciples first. Then the parables will be presented to the public. And that's another theme that we see all the time in Luke, where Jesus is having a personal, intimate conversation with the disciples first. In a way, he's prepping them. He's giving them the talk first. Then we see that same message delivered over to the people. So be on the lookout for that. And then finally, our last thing of housekeeping, let's remind ourselves the purpose and the intention of Luke's gospel. All of the Gospels are written to a different audience for a different purpose, and I think that Luke's purpose of his Gospel is important to remind ourselves. Luke cares a lot about money. He writes about money way more than any of the other gospel writers. Not just money itself, but our management of money, our use of our resources, our responsibility. So be on the lookout for that. And then Luke does, I think, better than any of the other gospels. He describes the flipping situation between those who think that they're high, who exalt themselves. Luke reminds us over and over and over again that those people will be brought low. And then likewise, those who are of a lowly, humble, obedient status, they will be exalted by the Lord. That theme is also going to come out. Let's go ahead and start in our text. We're in Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, this is the intimate conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples first. And I want you guys to look. There are 3 warnings that Jesus preps his disciples with. Again, we're getting to judgment. That's going to be our theme. We're looking at judgment. Here are the 3 warnings that his disciples are prepped with. I'm in Luke chapter 12, starting in the first verse. In the meantime, when so many thousands of people had gathered together that they were trampling one over another, he began to say to his disciples first. So who's our audience? This is the disciples first. Here's our first warning. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Nothing is covered up that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed to the housetops. That's warning number 1. A warning of hypocrisy and a warning of ultimate exposure. Let's keep going in verse number 4. Here's our second warning. I tell you, my friends, again, as audience, this is an intimate conversation with the disciples. Do not fear those who kill the body, and after that have nothing more that they can do to you. But I will warn you, second warning, whom to fear. Fear him who after he has killed has authority to cast into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. So the second warning is one about ultimate judgment. Who are we to fear? And then our third one, before he starts talking with the crowds, is in verse 8. The third warning, and I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men and the Son of God will also acknowledge before the angels of God. But the one who denies me before men will be denied before the angels of God. This is, in a sense, a prime to the pump. Jesus is now going to take this message out to a general audience with his disciples already stewing on these warnings. And as I've mentioned, ultimately, they're going to be about judgment. So here's kind of a breakdown of tonight. We're really not going to leave this text. We're going to march along as Luke has laid it out. I'm going to look at 5 parables. There are more in this section, chapters 12 through 13, but these 5 are pretty quick. They're pretty easy to understand, and I think that they get the point across. Now, even though all 5 of these are about readiness and being prepared for the last judgment, they each have their own unique flavor. So before we read them, I'm going to give you guys kind of like a key word or a key term to look for as we read. Let's start with the first one. It's often called the parable of the rich fool, and it's going to start in Luke chapter 12 and verse 13. Luke chapter 12 and verse 13. Here's a key word to look for. I do this with my 8th graders whenever we have a large chunk of text. Here's something to look for as we read. We're looking for possessions. Possessions is what we're looking for. Okay, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, all right, our audience has changed. No longer just the disciples, now to the crowd. Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said to him, man, who made me a judge or an arbiter over you? And he said to him, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. And he told them a parable, saying, This is a very common structure and setup to the parables. A teaching has been given, and Jesus, being the great teacher that he is now going to back that up with a relatable story. Here we are in verse 16. The parable is saying, quote, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do, for I have nowhere to store my crops?' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns, and I will build larger ones. And there I will store all of my grains and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things that you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with the one who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God.'" Did you see the use of possessions in that parable? The first thing I want to draw your guys' attention to is that this man is coming to Jesus for the wrong purpose. He came to Jesus as if he were a judge of earthly things. And Jesus, he sets that on the right track immediately. He says, no. I am not here in this earth to be a judge over your material possessions. It's not what I'm interested in. Instead, Christ is going to come the spiritual worth of a man. I think that this parable is kind of easy for me because I'm not a rich man. And so I see myself, not really being bothered by this. I don't have all of this ample wealth that I'm going to spend all my time and resources for. But in the same sense, in a very true way, if you ask any single person in my friend group, we all want a barn. We want a barn so bad. And you're like, well, what are you going to put in the barn? Stuff. Probably stuff from James's house. I just want all this stuff to put into the barn. We have a group chat, not the barbecue smoking group chat, but it's a building group chat called Kingdom Builders. Clever name. And it's people, we share like home improvement projects basically. And Jake Hersey will share videos, and he's showing something that he's doing in his shop, and he shows a video of this shop that he has at this new house. And I'm jealous. I want that. I want the barn. I want the barn, and I want it full of things. But Jesus here is talking about this man not in a positive sense. He is not praised for the gathering up of his wealth. So this is a legitimate question then for us, especially as Americans. When is it ingenuity, industry, and preparedness, and when is it pride, greed, and materialism? That's a judgment call, right? We would say, I want James to be industrious. I want him to be prepared. I want him to provide for his family. When do we praise that? And when do we say, no, it's pride? Well, I think what Jesus is pointing to is that the priority system is flipped. Not to say that this man is somehow evil for storing up his things in his barn, but he does so at the expense of his soul. And if I can point you back to verse 21, he says this, "So is the one who lays up treasures for himself." I think that's the emphasis. And what's the contrast? "And is not rich towards God." Judgment still comes to those who might seem most prepared in life. Let's move on to our second parable. Our second parable is sometimes called the Master's Return. I'm going to be in Luke 12, starting in verse 35, if you guys want to turn over there. Luke 12:35. We're just marching through the conversation that Jesus has with the crowd. Same audience, same topic. Here's another example. Luke 12, starting in verse 35. The key word that I want you guys to look for, or a theme, is being awake and being ready. Look for that as we read. Verse 35, "Stay dressed for action, and keep your lamps burning, and be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from a wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once while he comes and knocks." Verse 37, "Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. If he comes in the second watch or in the third, or finds them awake, blessed are those servants. So in this, Jesus presents himself as the master of the house. Well, who's the house? It's Israel. And all the time we see Jesus talking about his people Israel as his servants. They're called the servants of God over and over and over in the last title, or in the last Testament. But here Jesus is saying that the current servants of the house are not ready. They're not ready for me, because here's Jesus in the flesh presenting himself to his servants Israel, and they were not ready for the master's return. They were not ready for him. I also want to point out this too, that whenever I say we're talking about parables of judgment, our mind is, oh, these are all parables of doom and gloom and parables of suffering. That's not this parable. This parable actually praises the servants who were ready, and it's a parable full of joy. The master comes home and they are sitting and they're dining together. This is a parable of judgment in the positive sense. One that says the servants who are awake and ready will be rewarded. So judgment is not just one of doom and gloom. Are you awake? Are you ready for the master's return? That's parable number 2. Now, the next parable, you might say, is also connected to the story. I'm going to split it up, though, because it uses a different metaphor. So we're still in the same text. I'm going to pick up in verse 39. Verse 39, and I want you guys to look for this, timing. Look for timing in this third parable. But know this, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. We're talking in the same story here about a master who's gone and he's left the servants at the house, but we're introducing a new piece, and this piece is that a thief comes in the night. And the master says, well, my goodness, if I knew a thief was coming, I probably wouldn't have left. The point being, you don't know when a thief is going to come. We use this all the time in biblical language, like a thief in the night. Let's go ahead and flip over to 1 Thessalonians. Just to see one other author use this phrase, 1 Thessalonians 5. First Thessalonians 5, this is talking about the last judgment. We'll start in verse 1. We'll start at the start of the chapter. 1 Thessalonians 5. Now concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need to have anything written to you. Verse 2, for you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. When people are saying, there's peace and security, and sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman. Like a thief in the night. When I was in high school, my grandparents, they lived next door to us. And it was a great situation. My parents, they were able to look after for my grandparents just because they were neighbors. It was an awesome situation. And I remember I was woken up one night by my dad, frantic as can be, told me to put on some clothes, run outside, and I go into my grandparents' driveway, and there was a car that had driven through their fence, through their garage, into the backyard. Police are already there, and we find that that was a getaway car, that they had stolen that car from a neighboring area, that they had driven it, and my grandparents' driveway was lined up with the street, so if you didn't know, dead end, you got to turn here, these drivers went straight through. And I remember my grandparents were really shaken about this, but the police officers were as calm as could be, and I remember talking to one of the police officers, and I was like, have you ever seen something like this? It's crazy. And it says, like a thief in the night. I was like, wow, this is so normal and typical for you, but this was crazy. It's just like a thief in the night. You could never predict it. You would never know. Peter also uses this phrase again in 2 Peter 3. He says that judgment will come like a thief in the night. For those who are prepared, the Son of Man comes as a welcomed friend. But for those who are unprepared, the Son of Man comes as a thief in the night. Sometimes we say this: if only I knew when Christ was returning, then I would get my life back together. If only I knew how long I would have on the earth, then I would serve him more faithfully. But in this parable, the key word is timing. No man knows the hour. Let's move on to our fourth parable. Fourth parable will be back in Luke. Luke chapter 12 in verse 41. Luke chapter 12 and verse 41. As we read through this fourth parable, we're still in the topic of judgment, but we're going to see a new metaphor used to describe the coming of Christ. As we read, look for this: the master's will. Doing the master's will. Luke 12:41. Peter said, "Lord, are you telling this parable for all of us?" And the Lord said, "Who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom his master will set over his household to give them their portions of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all of his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, 'My master is delayed in coming,' and begins to beat the male and the female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour that he does not know, and will cut him into pieces and put him with the unfaithful." Verse 47, "And that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating." The language is ramping up. Jesus is now hitting this same topic over and over and over again, and the language is getting more intense. We're no longer talking about things that are abstract. We're talking about the relationship between a boss and an employee, something that would have been relatable to everyone in the audience. I told you guys to look for the master's will, and this reminds me of what we just touched on in Hebrews, where the Hebrew writer is going to quote from Psalm 40, what we love to point out over and over and over again, where we say that the Lord did not find the sacrifices of the Old Testament to be sufficient, but rather when you have come to do the will of the Father. Look at verse 47 again. "And that servant who knew his master's will, but did not get ready or act according to his will, he's the one who's going to receive the punishment." I know this is kind of a strange metaphor to use, but I 100% feel the surprise of this servant whenever it comes to some household chores. Typically, here's what happens. James goes to bed around 7 o'clock, and Kate's going to say, "Okay, here's what we need to do before we go to bed." And usually he's going to switch the laundry over, there's dishes to do, put the chair on the table, run the vacuum, things like that. And Kate will often go and shower and get ready for bed. And so in my head, I'm like, awesome, I got 15 minutes to do nothing. And sometimes I'll say, like, well, yes, but by the time you're done, by the time you're ready for bed, I will have switched the laundry. It's very similar to this man who says, "My master is delayed in coming," and then he begins to do all these awful things. Sometimes that might be a little bowl of ice cream, scroll on Facebook Marketplace, and then I get caught up in myself, and I hear the bathroom door open, and I think the laundry was not moved over yet. The master is coming, and the work was not done. I obviously think this is a little bit more serious than that, but I'm sure we all feel that. I promised to do something. I had an expectation of getting something done, But instead, I folded my hands, and now I have to have a conversation about why we're going to bed later than predicted. 1 Corinthians 15, I think, says this in like the most beautiful way possible. Whenever Paul is writing here, he says this. He says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all see, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye at the last trumpet." Beautiful poetry, but man, that's a scary thought. That the final day of the Lord, the judgment is going to come, and there's not going to be a countdown clock. It's going to be in a moment, in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye. And we're going to have an account for things when the Master returns. We have one more parable, and then we'll wrap it up for you guys. This last parable is going to be in Luke 13. Luke 13. Starting in verse 6. This is the parable of the barren fig tree. And as we read, I'll ask you guys to look for bearing fruit. Look for bearing fruit as we read. "And he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. And he said to the vine dresser, 'Look, for 3 years now I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I have found none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground?' And he answered him, 'Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and put on some manure. Then, if it should bear fruit the next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down.'" What is God looking for whenever he comes? When the judgment happens, what's he looking for? He's looking for fruit on the branches. In other words, he's looking for something that we have produced in our life. We've been given everything imaginable to follow his will. God's will and expectations are not beyond our own accomplishments. So we could have a whole separate side conversation here about faith and works. Some of our friends who say, faith, 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 with a dead life is the same as a tree with no fruit on the branches. Use that metaphor when you're talking to someone about this faith and works conversation. Well, when the judgment comes, he's looking for fruit, and fruit better be on the branches. God's judgment, though, should always be viewed in the context of patience and mercy. Do you all see that in this parable as well? This is not a parable where God is showing himself as just running through the vineyard with an axe, just waiting to chop down all the trees. That's not our God, and that's not the picture of his character that's painted here. But rather, we see God's character painted in this parable as a patient God. One who says, yes, I'll give it another year. Let's mend the soil. Let's add in some fertilizer. Let's give it one more year. We are all given, in some way, shape, or form, that next year. And that's now. The question then becomes, is that time of God's patience, are we using that time of his patience to bear fruit for him? How are you using your time on the earth? So those are our 5 parables. There's more. 12 all the way through 13. I think there's 9 in total. All of the same topic, all of the same theme, judgment, preparedness, being ready for God in their own unique flavor and story. I want to take us to one more place to really drive the message home, and then we'll do a summary before we're over. But I want to end in Hebrews chapter 9, please. Hebrews chapter 9. Thank you guys for your attentiveness tonight and for reading along with me. I appreciate it. I hope that something here you can take home. A lot of these parables have had a negative reaction of the characters. And what I mean by that is a lot of these characters have messed up. It was either the manager who wasn't ready for the master's return, or it's the fig tree that didn't have enough fruit on the branches, or it's the person who left his house ready for the thief to break in. That's not the picture, though, of the Christian when it comes time for judgment. Here's what Hebrews has to say about our awaiting for the Lord. Hebrews 9 in verse 27. Hebrews 9 in verse 27. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes the judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly awaiting him. That's our response to the judgment. And when we have conversations about our hope in the Lord, when we talk about our hope in salvation, our hope in the resurrection, that means that we should not see the Christian, the believer, the one who is washed in the blood of Christ, trembling in fear at the judgment. We see one who eagerly awaits the coming of the Lord. And that should be different. That should be different. The hope within us is not one of the servant who is so nervous and scared because the master has returned. It's one who sees the master coming as a bridegroom and says, I am eagerly awaiting you. Here's our quick summary. I've written the 5 parables into questions, and this will act as our invitation. Are you building barns for your treasures on earth, or are you rich in God? Are you surprised by the master's return, or are you dressed and ready to welcome your master? Are you caught off guard by death as it takes your life like a thief, or are you ready for judgment? Are you relaxed in the field because you think your master is delayed, or will he find you doing his will? And then finally, are your branches bare, or are they growing fruit for the Lord? Judgment is coming at a time and an hour which no man knows. But it's our responsibility and our duty as servants of the Lord to be ready for that. If you're here tonight and you do not feel like you are ready for the master's return, let's change something. Let's do something tonight. Let's commit ourselves to living differently. Let's put away sin that we know should not be involved in our life. And ultimately, if tonight is the night that you are ready to make your commitment to the Lord, the water is ready. We encourage you in any way possible to get ready for the Lord's return. We invite you to come forward as we stand and as we sing.